fate never intended for Lindsey Vonn to be standing in that start house on February 8, 2026. Cortina d'Ampezzo's legendary Olimpia delle Tofane run was meant to host the single most miraculous return the sporting world had ever witnessed. Everything was primed for a spectacle. Under piercing blue heavens and atop ice as slick as glass, thousands held their breath, wondering if a 41-year-old legend powered by a titanium knee and missing a left ACL entirely could truly conquer the planet's elite. The atmosphere in the spectator zone was crackling with tension. You had icons like Snoop Dogg peering over the barriers, while Lindsey's dad, Alan Kildo, stared down the mountain, paralyzed by a cocktail of immense pride and sheer dread. The moment Vonn exploded from the gate in bib 13, the Italian fans erupted into a noise so loud you could feel it in your chest. It was a warrior's tribute to someone who had sacrificed 2 decades of blood and sweat to these very peaks. She launched with absolute savagery, and within the first 10 seconds, she was clocking velocities that would get you arrested on any freeway. Her form was predatory, her stance rock solid, and for a fleeting moment, it looked like the impossible was about to happen. But 13 seconds into the run, the universe held its breath. Nearing Gate 4, she let her line wander mere inches too far right. When you are tearing down ice at 70 miles per hour, inches are the difference between glory and catastrophe. Her inside arm hooked the gate panel, creating a violent recoil that wrenched her torso around just as she launched off a kicker, turning a world-class athlete into a helpless ragdoll. Her skis twisted sideways against the flight path, leading to a brutal impact on her right hip, followed by a chaotic, bone-rattling tumble down the frozen piste. The hush that descended wasn't merely a pause in the applause. It was a vacuum of sound that seemed to drain every ounce of air from the Dolomites, pausing the event for more than 10 agonizing minutes. While medical teams rushed the slope, the only thing breaking the quiet was the heavy, rhythmic beat of the rescue chopper lowering from the clouds. Everyone wondered, was this the ultimate display of grit, or had the Titanium Queen finally pushed her luck past the breaking point? To truly grasp the gravity of those 13 seconds, you need to rewind and examine the 9 insane days preceding them. Let's be brutally honest. Lindsey Vonn had no business being anywhere near that start line. 9 days prior in Crans-Montana, Switzerland, she endured a wreck brutal enough to retire anyone instantly, leaving her with MRI scans that read like a combat medic's report. We are talking about a completely severed ACL in her left knee, severe bone contusions, and a shredded meniscus to top it off. For the average person, that means surgery and 6 months on the couch. For a pro athlete, that is usually the final curtain call. But Lindsey Vonn has never played by the rules that govern mere mortals. She treated that week not as a recovery period, but as an act of pure, unfiltered rebellion against biology. While doctors called it madness, Vonn hit the weight room, sharing clips of heavy squats and plyometrics on a joint that was structurally nothing more than a wobble board. She strapped on a heavy-duty carbon fiber exoskeleton to serve as an external ligament, forcing her quads and hamstrings to do the work her torn ACL could not. Touching down in Cortina earlier in the week, she didn't just show up to participate. She attacked the training runs and absolutely dominated. She clocked in with the 11th and then the 3rd fastest times against the entire field. At 41, she was proving her will to win outweighed her anatomy, telling the press plainly, "If I can ski, I will ski," citing a lifetime of chasing the edge. She acknowledged the lethal nature of downhill racing but refused to live with the what-ifs of not trying. She staked everything on her history, having conquered this specific mountain 12 times, memorizing every ripple, shadow, and curve. It was a high-stakes bet that her instincts could override the failure of her physical body. Breaking down the tape frame by frame reveals how quickly the dream died. 13 seconds to go from iconic return to Olympic nightmare. Vonn exploded from the start with tremendous force. She sliced through the opening gates in a perfect tuck, looking not just quick, but terrifyingly fast. However, nearing the Defying course's first big air, she cut her line just a hair too aggressively. Skiing without an ACL destroys your side-to-side stability. Lacking the trust to dig deep into the edges, she tried to compensate by initiating her turns prematurely. She went wide on Gate 3 and, in a desperate bid to correct, sliced back inside for Gate 4, but she cut it too fine. Her arm and shoulder smashed into the gate panel, but instead of bending away, the plastic trapped her limb. It became a tether, yanking her right side backward, while the rest of her body kept rocketing forward at 70 miles per hour. The resulting torque spun her frame so that when she hit the jump an instant later, she was already rotating off-axis. She launched into the sky completely sideways, which, in the unforgiving world of downhill skiing, is essentially a death sentence. The mountain slammed back, and she hit the powder with bone-jarring force on her right flank. Cruelly, that was the exact leg holding the titanium hardware installed in 2024. Instead of gliding, her skis bit sideways into the ice. The edges dug deep, wrenching her limbs and launching her into a chaotic, terrifying cartwheel. On the live feed, the stadium's thunderous energy vanished, displaced by a sound that made your blood run cold. Vaughn's agony pierced the airwaves, a cry not just of injury, but of pure panic at being pinned down. You could hear her desperate pleas to release the bindings, the ultimate nightmare for a skier with a history of shattered joints. What followed was a quarter hour of pure, surreal tension that froze the Winter Games as the giant video boards abruptly cut to black. The pumping soundtrack died out, and a swarm of half a dozen medical personnel descended on her location high up the course. Evacuation wasn't an option yet. They had to secure her broken body right there on the frozen face of the mountain. Up in the VIP boxes, Alan Kildau fixed his gaze on the floorboards, physically unable to witness his daughter's trauma. Even Snoop Dogg froze, clutching his head in disbelief, the bitter contest with Sofia Goggia evaporating instantly. No one cared about the podium count. They just prayed for a heartbeat, waiting 10 agonizing minutes before the orange rescue sled appeared. The course was simply too steep and treacherous to risk sliding her down to the base. They radioed for air support, and a chopper hovered just yards off the deck, lowering a medic via a steel cable. Once Vaughn was lashed to the basket and hooked to the line, the machine winched her skyward. Watching her hang suspended, slowly swallowed by the yellow aircraft, felt like witnessing the final curtain drop on a dynasty. The Speed Queen wasn't tucking through the finish beam. She was being airlifted off the very peak that built her legend. Now, the uncomfortable reality sets in. Did she have any business being on that start line? Since the accident, the arguments haven't stopped, and Tina Mays, a legend in her own right, didn't mince words. The gamble was too high. Surgeons are baffled that an athlete with a totally severed ACL was given the green light for those velocities. Usually, a physician's no is absolute, but in the adrenaline-fueled world of downhill, medical approval is often a bargaining process. If the skier hits the strength metrics and passes the symmetry exams, the final call frequently falls to the competitor. And Vaughn checked every single one of those boxes. Surviving practice runs is one thing. Executing at an Olympic threshold is an entirely different beast. She didn't show up to be a tourist. She clipped in to dominate. Victory requires dancing on the razor's edge, slicing the flags tighter than any sane person would dare. Did the knee fail her? We can't say with certainty, but riding on faith and a carbon brace leaves zero room for a slip-up. The moment she struck that pole, her compromised joint lacked the structural integrity to bounce back. Her anatomy finally waved the white flag, though if you ask the woman herself, she'd likely refuse to call it a mistake. To a spirit like hers, crashing out beats rotting on the sofa, haunted by the ghost of what if. As the chopper rushed towards a Milan trauma center, the event rolled on, delivering a wildly emotional whiplash for the American squad. Breezy Johnson, the student who studied at Vaughn's feet, delivered a masterclass on the snow, edging out Germany's Emma Eicher by a razor-thin 0.04 of a second to snatch the gold. Johnson collapsed in the finish area, sobbing, but those weren't purely tears of celebration. She had just endured 20 harrowing minutes watching the architect of her career getting hoisted off the slope in a basket. Through a throat tight with emotion, Johnson told the press, "I saw the wreck. I knew instantly how bad it was. Lindsey is the blueprint. None of us would be standing here without her. I pushed for the team, but popping champagne feels wrong when your idol is lying in a trauma ward. It was a changing of the guard, scripted like a dark classical drama. The general falls on the battlefield so the recruit can seize the crown. Johnson's victory proves Vaughn's killer instinct lives on. We are addicted to the idea of the storybook walk-off. We craved a golden farewell lap for Lindsey, ending in glory and confetti, but life rarely follows the script. For Lindsey Vonn in 2026, triumph isn't measured in hardware. It is defined by the sheer guts of a 41-year-old with a bionic leg and a shredded knee daring to step into the gate. She took a discipline meant to pulverize the youth and turned it into her personal kingdom for 2 decades. She stared down a prognosis that would cripple a giant and brushed it off like dust. Lindsey Vonn didn't snatch that second gold trophy. Yet, inside those 13 seconds of raw, distilled grit, she delivered a lesson worth infinitely more than any medallion. She proved that you hold the pen for your story's conclusion, refusing to let a wreck in Switzerland serve as her final bow. She picked the battle, she decided to gamble it all, and she insisted on conquering that peak for one final run. Whether this marks the finale or just another scar in her medical file, the legend is already carved in stone. Lindsey didn't merely make the roster. She sculpted the entire sport to match her spirit, and that ominous yellow chopper is history. The hush over Cortina has now shattered under the roaring applause for Breezy Johnson. Yet the vision of Lindsey, rocking bib 13 with a predator's gaze, launching from that start house one last time, is burned into history. Once you quit racing for the crowd and start riding for your own soul, that peak finally surrenders to you. And for 13 magnificent seconds, it was entirely Lindsey's dominion.